and welcome to Amy Hill Creates. Looking to enhance the background of your embossing folders, these two cards were made and taught at Bridget Casey's 24-hour Crafting Bliss retreat event in April. And it features the Blooming Creativity retreat kit. So let's find out what we need in order to create these two cards. So first you're going to need two pieces of 8.5 by 11 green cardstock or any dark color that you have. And I have two pieces of 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch paper, one piece of cold press watercolor paper from Altenew, some cloud white pigment ink, and enchanted gold pigment ink, as well as obsidian pigment ink. And we have 3 watercolors that are inside of the kit. We have a yellow, a blue, and a red. And with these colors, you can make a ton of colors because those are primary colors. The Altenew crafting scissors. This is also in the kit, the Garden Harmony embossing folder, and the Proud of You stamp set, as well as the mini dogwood stamp set. And some clear embossing powder. We're going to be using that for watercoloring and also some fine watercolor brushes. I'm going to be using the number 4 and the number 2 round brush from this set, and a T-square ruler to make sure everything lines up nice and straight. A little glass with some water in it. A medium-sized palette because I like to mix my paints on that palette. And of course the Altenew tape runner, and if you have an embossing machine, and a little bit of instant dimension foam tape. So our first step is actually to prepare the paper. So you're going to grab a piece of 8.5 by 11, and this is going to be cut into half on the 8.5 inch side to make 2 4 1/4 by 11 inch panels. And then you're going to take another piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock, and on the 11 inch side, cut that in half at 5.5 and 5.5. And with this one of the pieces, you're going to make a 5.5 inch square. So those two other pieces are extra. I'm going to put those away, use them for something else, but these are the 3 pieces that you need for the 2 projects today. So we're going to start by taking that 5.5 inch piece of paper. You're going to mist it a little bit with some water and then add it into the Garden Harmony 3D embossing folder and run that through your embossing machine with whatever settings your machine needs to have. Now I do like to run that through twice, and this is going to give fantastic detail, but I feel like the detail gets a little lost, and so what I'd like to do is enhance that detail. And you're going to do this by starting out with some cloud white pigment ink. Very softly, you're going to make little circles, and I kind of start off the paper, practice my circles, and then very softly bring that ink pad down to the surface of the paper, and I am just catching the very, very top of those leaves that are on the embossing folder. I'm trying not to push the ink in to the background. I just want to grab the ink on the top of the embossing folder. And this is allowing that ink to highlight all of the raised edges of that embossing folder. And you can see now the detail, the fabulous detail that's in this embossing folder. Now, as this is pigment ink, and I'm going around here until I feel like I got enough ink onto the surface. You can add as little or as much as you would like to highlight all of these leaves in the embossing folder. Now, as this is pigment ink and I do want it to dry, I'm going to hit it with a heat tool very quickly just to make sure that all of that ink is dried. This step is optional, but it is a little bright, so now I want to come in with some enchanted gold some enchanted gold pigment ink, and just gently swipe that over the top of the embossing folder. This is going to give a really beautiful patina to that white ink. And I think it really enhances the look and the color and gives it a little bit of an aged feel to it. Now, as this is pigment ink, you do want to make sure that it's dry before we move on to the next step, and so you can hit that with a heat tool or just wait for that to dry for you. That just looks gorgeous. So now we're going to cut this down to use on our cards. So the first cut you're going to make is at 2.5 inches. And then this is going to be turned, and that will be cut at 3.5 inches. So your panel is going to end up being 2.5 by 3.5 inches. So 2.5 inches wide and 3.5 inches tall. You're going to put that piece to the side. And on the other large piece that was left over, you're going to cut this at 1.5 inches. And you're going to then cut this at 1.5 inch squares. So this is going to be 3 squares that you're making out of this, and you can see that you still have a lot left over. So with these leftovers, you can use them on other cards or cut them up however that you want. So you can see those leftovers over to the right. So now I'm going to grab some piece of that 5x7 watercolor paper. I'm going to treat that with an anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to stamp flower images from the mini dogwood set and also from the Proud of You set. And I'm just putting these into my stamp wheel, and I am making sure that there's a good amount of space between them because I like to use the rest of the paper as a swatch guide for when I mix my own colors. Now I'm stamping these in Obsidian Black. Obsidian is a pigment ink. It is waterproof. And to aid in that waterproofing, I'm also going to be adding some clear embossing powder. As this is watercolor paper, I'm using the smooth side. You can see I don't get a super great impression that first time. It does take a little bit, and that's why having a tool like the stamp wheel is fabulous. And I ended up stamping this about 3 times before I got the impression that I wanted. After I stamped it, I added some clear embossing powder to each of those images, and you can see that I cut them just in half. And now I'm going to start the watercoloring process. So I'm just going to be using blue, yellow, and red. And since these are primary colors, you can use them to make any color that you wish, except for white. I'm grabbing my number 2 and number 4 watercolor brushes, and on my medium palette, I'm going to add a little bit of blue, yellow, and then red. And see how I'm putting those colors very far away from each other. So I'm going to start by just getting a little bit of water with my brush. And this is the number 4 round. And I'm adding water in until I get the color that I want. You can see that I am first testing this out on my paper. It's looking a little dark to me, so I'm going to add a little bit more water just in order to lighten that up. And this is just how I watercolor. It doesn't mean that this is the way to do it. You can watercolor however it is that you choose. I just found that for me this works the best way. So with the number 2 brush, I'm going to keep this as my clean brush. I'm just going to add a little bit of water to one of the petals. And now I'm going to drop in my pigment. And I'm not going all the way up the petal with this. All I'm doing is just going right around the petal that's over it. I don't want to bring that pigment all the way up to the top. And I'm also going to add in some water with my second brush in just a moment. And this is a method called glazing, where I start off with light and then I continue to add darker pigment until I get it to where I want it to be. This process does take a little bit, and these colors will dry back once the images dry. But since it's watercolor, you can keep on adding in the color until you get the desired look and effect that you want. And I am adding color to one petal at a time, making sure that that petal is dry before I do any petals that are right next to it. So this is my clean brush. I'm just kind of taking the pigment that's there and just mixing it in with what's already in. So just so I have a nice even blend with it. And I'm going to go in and add more of the red that I have, just to continue to get that darkened color. And I did not speed this up, so this is in real time. I wanted to show you the first petal and how long it took me in real time. The rest of the flower and the second flower of the mini dogwood I did speed up, so you'll see that a little bit faster. So you can see I'm starting to add darker color. I'm going a little bit closer to the original red that I had put down, just to get some nice dark color on that. And then using my clean brush, I'm just blending that into what is already there. So you can see I have a nice effect. I'm trying to get it to be darker, closer to the center of the flower. And if you feel like it's too dark, you can actually push that pigment back into the center, and also use a paper towel to pick up any color that you want to remove if that color is wet. So I'm going to continue this process until I have that petal exactly where I want it. So I'm dropping in some more color here, just to add a little bit of depth around that petal that sticks up above the one I'm working on. And then coming in with my clean brush in order to blend that color in with the rest of the petal. Once I have it where I like it, then I'm going to move on to my next one. So I want to add a little bit of difference, so I'm just adding a little bit of yellow, and you can see that I'm testing what the color that on my paper before I get onto my image, just to make sure it's exactly what I want. So you can see I'm repeating the process of just adding in that color to the end, and then coming in with my clean brush and adding water to smooth out the sides of that. And I'm going to continue on with each of these petals, trying my best to add in the color and then move on over and smooth that color out. And I will continue this for the rest of the flower. And after this petal, it's going to jump to an almost completed flower. So I'm still going, making sure it's the same process, and I'm actually trying to keep the petals on the outside a little bit darker, so that way I can do the petals on the inside a little bit lighter. So this is my last outside petal. And now when I get to the inside petals, I am going to go in with a lighter wash of red. And you can see I've already done the very, very inside with a yellow. And I'm doing these inside petals with a lighter wash of red. You can see I'm just going in with my number 4 brush and just adding in that color. And that just gives me a little bit of graduated color and some difference between, so all the petals aren't exactly the same. And I'm just dropping in a little bit of red because I feel like that's a little washed out, those petals. So I'm just adding in a little bit more red. And then just using my clean brush in order to blend out that color. So when I move on to the leaves, I need to mix my color. So I'm adding a little bit of yellow and a little bit of blue. And that's why I have the paints that I'm using very far apart from each other, because it gives me some room in order to mix colors and to get exactly what I want. I'm not loving the color that I was able to get here. It's a little too yellow for me. So I go back in and actually mix in a little bit more blue in order to make it teal. So now that I found what I want, I can go back in and add that to the first leaves that I had done, just to make them a little bit more blue and a little less yellow. For the flowering dogwood, this is a much smaller stamp, and there's not as many petals because it's a dogwood and there's only 4 petals to each of the flowers. So all I'm doing is just dropping some color in and then just blending it out with a clean brush. And you can see this is my first layer. I'm really trying not to get any sort of pigment to the top or the sides of each of those petals. And then I'm going to go in with that number 4 brush that has a little bit more red pigment, and then use the clean brush in order to move that pigment around. I'm taking care not to add any red to the center of the dogwoods or to the leaves, because I want to make those yellowy green. and I'm going to do the leaves in a darker green. So there's our two finished flowers. Just want to make sure that they're dry, and then I'm going to use my micro tip scissors from Altenew to fussy cut these out. And it's a quick process. It doesn't really take that much time, but you want to make sure that you are moving your paper. That's going to give you the best bet. All right, so now I have these two, and now we're going to make some cards. So the first step is to create some card bases. And so these were the two pieces of paper that I cut originally, and now I scored them at 5.5 to make two top folding cards. And now I'm going to cut my card fronts, and I'm going to cut those to 4 by 5.25, just to make sure that I have a little bit of a border around. So the panel that was 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches, I'm just going to center this right in the middle of my panel. And I'm using a T ruler just to make sure everything is nice and centered. And that's going to help me figure out where I want to put my sentiment. And I'm just going to hand stamp this sentiment with obsidian ink. And this is the thank you that comes from the Flowering Dogwood set. Add that onto my card front. And then I'm going to add the Flowering Dogwood flower. And you can see just how it tucks right up above that sentiment. And just really a cute card. For the second card, I'm going to take those 1.5 inch squares that we had cut originally and line them up on the left hand side of my card front. That was cut to 4 by 5.25. And I'm doing my best to line these up in a straight line. I added my sentiment in the lower right hand corner and added that to my card base. Added some Instant Dimension foam tape onto the back of the very large flower, and then added that to the card. And here's that one. Just looks absolutely gorgeous. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really had a blast teaching this. I'd love it if you subscribe to my channel to be notified of other videos, and I host a monthly card class on my website. See you there.